Ba-dum. There we are. So lesson three, Ger and Karanatillaka, starts with a passage from the Questions of King Milinda. In the written analysis that I did this quite some time ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think, maybe even five, something like that. And that was before I had started the explanatory glossary. That's where I refer people now from rather than setting out in full in the notes to the analyzed text, the history and story of the word. I can refer them to the explanatory glossary. This text was prepared before the explanatory glossary came into existence, and I think before I developed certain of the devices I now have for explaining. So it's a little bit of it's kind of a Whelan Mark One effort this rather than the later one. Never mind. Hopefully it will be good enough. So what I'll do, I'll start off before we call up the text. I will start off by just slowly reading through this passage that we'll be looking at. It's the one on page 29 of the printed book, the G&K printed book. Those of you who feel so inclined, I would encourage you just to listen to it, without even looking at the text. I know I find it almost impossible to obey an instruction like that if it's given to me. So be it. It's something that I just wish I'd done more as I was younger. Anyway, here we go. By wish I'd done more when I was younger, obeying that kind of instruction, as well as lots of other kind of wise instructions that I neglected to obey while I was young. Again, another story. Bhante Nagasena Tikochi Satto Yo Imamha Kaya Anyang Kayam Sankamatiti Nahi Maharajati. Yadi Bhante Nagasena Imamha Kaya Anyang Kayam Sankamantu Natti Nanu Muttu Bhavissati Papakehi Kammehi. Every sentence, by the way, in this paragraph ends with a T because it means unquote. I'll leave out the T, and so I'll just recite as it was written without the T unquote. Ama Maharaja Yadi na patisandhaya muttu bhavissati papakehi kammehi. Yasmachakho Maharaja patisandhati tasma na parimuttu papakehi kammehi. Bhante Nagasena nacha sankamati patisandhati cha. Ama Maharaja nacha sankamati patisandhati cha. Katham Bhante Nagasena nacha sankamati patisandhati cha. Upamam karohi. Yatha Maharaja Kochideva Puriso Padipato Padipam Padipeya. Kinnukoso Maharaja Padipo Padipam ha Sankamanto Nahi Bhante. Evameva Ko Maharaja Nacha Sankamati Patisandhati cha. So I will call up the text. Where have we gone? Here we are. Just share screen with you. Okay, are we properly shared? Good, thanks. So it starts with this question asked by Melinda of Nagasena. Bhante Nagasena, ati kochi satto yo imamha kaya anyang kayang sankamatiti. Um, so that's the same Bhante that we use in modern times when addressing a monk, a Theravada monk. So venerable something, venerable Nagasena. Atikochi Satto. Um, and I think we are looking at this, and yeah, in fact, the very first section of the grammar in this lesson we'll be looking at deals with the interrogative pronoun go, who. It's pronoun and adjective, meaning just who or which thing, which person. So it can be used in either sense. If you add chi in Sanskrit, it was chiddu chit to an interrogative. It makes an interrogative into an indefinite. So ko, who, kochi in Sanskrit, it's kashchid, would mean someone. So interrogative who to an indefinite mean someone. We don't know who, someone, anyone. So ati um, means is. It's one that's actually cognate with the Latin est is, and in French, written the same way, est but pronounced e, the Spanish es. And exactly that same word is the one that came into English as is via the Germanic, modern German, ist. So it's asti in Sanskrit, est in Latin, ist in German, is in English, but the asti became ati in Pali by the normal phonetic mutation, where st almost always becomes a t. So asti, ati. And it has the meaning here of is there, does there exist? So is there kochi sato, is there any being? Sato means a being generally. Typically, well, actually, I think it's always used to mean a sentient being.
James, it,
Duncan.
it, it I wrongly translated this as there is, as opposed to is there. How would you say? How do you know it's a question as opposed to a statement?
Um, if you just looked at the sentence as it stands, without punctuation, of course, in the version we've got here, there's a
Yeah, the
there's a
question
there's
mark.
there's a
The question
question
mark
mark.
helps.
That's cheating. That's cheating because they didn't use those. They didn't use those in ancient India. The answer is you just kind of have to. You can only tell by, often you can only tell by context. Um, if you just looked at those words on their own without punctuation, out of context, then on their own it would be ambiguous whether it was intended as a statement or a question. There's nothing inherently there that says this is a question. I mean, in English, for example, I think in most European languages, you can, there's something in the grammatical structure of the sentence that tells you that it's a question. Um, for example, um, actually, there was one, I don't know whether it's true or not, in some philosophy degree exam paper at Cambridge was said, the question was put, is this a question? And the clever students were meant to answer it. And whether it's apocryphal, I don't know. But no, one of the clever students, as later replied, if it is a question, this is the answer. Anyway, grammatically there, by the inversion of subject and object, is it rather than it is. But in Sanskrit and Pali, very often not. Here we know it is, apart from the helpfully inserted question mark in our English version or Romanized version here. We know it is. Firstly, because of the kind of it is a series of questions and answers. Um, and for indeed, the very next line, nahi, it answers no. So it's either a statement there is, or it's a question, is there? And the next question, nahi, no. It looks like a negative answer to a question. But to come back to your point, very valid point, Duncan, there is nothing in that sentence on its own that screams out this is a question.
It's a very subtle language, isn't it? It's very hard to get your to wrap your mind around it. The fact that it is so subtle.
I said, yes, it is. It is. And also another point you've got to remember is that within the language, in the spoken language, the actual tone of voice would
Yes,
almost certainly have indicated a statement rather than a question. Um, in fact, all the various languages I've looked at, there's very often, most often there is something within the grammatical structure that indicates it's a question rather than a statement. But in the spoken language, I know of no language where there's somehow in the inflection of the voice, it's indicated whether it's a question. But if this were to be, say, written just um, without punctuation and just written, then on its own it would be an ambiguous statement or question. You just know from context which it is.
sure. Okay, thanks,
Right.
James. Thanks.
James,
Yeah, Simon.
I was going to say, with regard to the question, um, obviously it would normally have something like the little particle nu in there. But your point that if it's the questions of King Melinda, then that's what you're expecting anyway, and you can dispense with that. I'm also the second point is I'm wondering whether Kochi kind of invites the idea that it is a question, whether you would normally say that if you weren't expecting, is there such a thing?
Mm.
And the third one for me is that even if it were, as Duncan said, read as a statement, so Bhante Nagasena, there is a being who from this body, etc., etc. Nahi, the philosophical meaning would still be clear, wouldn't it? I've made a statement. No, you're wrong. So that the meaning would be the same, wouldn't it? Really?
It would. And I thought of that as I was saying it because this response nahi. You're right, Simon. It could either be in response to the question, does such a thing exist? Nahi. No, it doesn't. Or it could be the response to the contradicting a statement that has just been made rather than answering a question that has just been asked. It could be either. Um,
Also, the issue about Kochi, the fact that I know it's probably a false friend here, but the fact that that does use the interrogative as its base, whether it normally could imply kind of, what thing or what person,
um,
whether it's used in the sense of making a statement or always used as if in an interrogative.
no, I think that we've seen it used so many times where in English we would just use someone or other. Who did that? I don't know. Kochi Akasi, someone or other said it. So it does not in itself bear an interrogative meaning. In fact, in a negative sentence, it would mean no one. So whether it's someone or no one, you'd use the same word in Sanskrit and Pali, but the translation into English would depend on whether it's a negative sentence or not. But no, I wouldn't go along with the idea that it inherently involves a question, maybe an implied question, since it almost maybe invites a question. Well, it's somebody who, or somebody I don't know who. So there may be a slight implied question, but on its own, it wouldn't be an interrogative at all. And in fact, if you look at for example, um, somebody knows Kochi Janati, but nobody knows Na Kochi Janati. Na Kochi Janati. Not anybody knows means nobody knows. There you're making a positive statement with no, or else you're making you're affirming that there is nobody who knows. So there's no interrogative element of Kochi in a negated sentence. And the satto, the way this word is formed is very much like our word being, being as a noun, a being. There is no being. So here, by the way, kochi is used as an adjective, not as a pronoun. So na kochi on its own would mean not anybody, nobody. But the same kochi can be used as um, this interrogative or indefinite adjective, kochi sato. So kochi sato here is used as an adjective. If the word sato had been omitted from the sentence, it would still make complete sense and would give pretty much the same meaning. So atikochi yo imamhakaya anyamkayam sankamati, is there anyone who leaves this body and goes into another one? Atikochi. But here it's atikochi satta. Is there any being? So sankamati, it's from our root. Let me just pull up iPad. Is the iPad up? Okay, right. It's from the root kram. Regular class one verb, kramati, and as we'd expect in Pali, gamati, meaning to, the root meaning of it is to step. To take a step. And when the verb is used on its own, gamati, it just tends to mean to move along by taking steps. Where we have the prefix some in front of it, sankamati, here that tends to convey the meaning of the completed act of crossing over. So stepping is often used to mean crossing over as well. So it's completing the process of stepping. If you go up to somebody, you just use the upa in front of it with the two prefixes, upa sankamati. And you see that at the beginning of many, many suttas. You say the Buddha was staying at such and such a place, and a certain person approached the Buddha. That is upasankamati is the word used. And also with the prefix ati, ati means over. And it can actually mean over in, just as in English, it can have a physical meaning. You step over an obstacle, you climb over a wall. Also in English, we use this over to mean excessively overzealous, over-enthusiastic about something. It's used in exactly the same way in Sanskrit and Pali as well. So we have this atikramati, Sanskrit, means to literally to overstep, meaning to step over. And in Pali, it becomes atikamati. With the doubling of the k there. That's because there's a kr there in Sanskrit. We now have it preceded by a short vowel. Was the kr, the consonant compound kr in Sanskrit, now preceded by the short vowel, so that gives it the opportunity to double itself. That's why you get atikamati. And that can be used to mean stepping over an obstacle, but it's very often used in the suttas, for example, to if you're proceeding from one stage to another, for example, in the description of the jhana meditations is a good one. It's the atikamati or samatikamati is used when you're crossing from one stage to another. So here we've got this. So very often this verb is used when you're talking about going from one stage of life to another, or from one stage of meditation to another. And here, of course, it's used in death. Is there basically the question is does transmigration exist? So it's sankamati, steps or just goes over. The ablative imamha, be right with you, Simon. Imamha kaya, from this body. Now, just we know that verbs of motion typically take the accusative motion towards, and this is the same phenomenon that we see here, just as gacchati sankamati, is you're moving towards something, therefore the accusative of motion. So imamahakaya, from this body, anyang kayang, to another body, sankamati. So is there, Nagasena, any being which steps over, which crosses over from this body to another body? Simon, please.
Yeah, I did a little bit of reading about this one, trying to track down Sankamati. Really, really slippery. It's very difficult. And I think this distinction between Sankamati and what's the other one? Patisandahati is what the entire kind of idea of not self and the kind of transmigration versus whatever we want to call rebirth, it hinges on. Interestingly, in Majjhima Nikaya 65, it's actually used as a verb, as a noun rather than a verb.
And so what form is used as a?
We have Sankamo.
Sankamo, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which the various commentators, a bridge, but the idea is that it's not a person stepping, it's something that actually stays in place between two states, that spans something as opposed to stepping across. And the other kind of interesting thing about this,
sorry, I don't think I quite followed that.
Well, if you have Sankamo, it's a bridge rather than a stepping across. It's something that spans the gap between two states, and it's obvious that certain things would sankamati, that inanimate objects would simply move between one place and another. So a wheel rolling over a bridge or between 2 points. And so maybe the important bit in the first line, although you say sato could be dispensed with, maybe that's what it's about, that atikochi sato is there a being that can move between things the same way that objects can?
Okay, Roger. So yeah, firstly, can you give me the number of the the Majjhima, which sutta?
Kaya, it's 65. So
65.
Adali Sutta. It's got in the same little bit Sankamo and Sankameya. And if you look at it, it's kind of slightly at odds. It's trickier than simply stepping across.
Okay. That's interesting. I will follow this up because the root verb itself and distinctly and unambiguous refers to stepping and taking a step, and atikamati. Anyway, it's a very interesting one. I'll follow that up. So I've got MN65 and Sankamo, and then the optative form that you just quoted, Sankameya. The other point I was saying, is there any, as I said, you could omit the sato. Did I actually say, Simon, did I actually say that you could omit sato without changing the meaning of the sentence?
I think that's what I interpreted you as saying, yeah.
If I said that or led you to believe that that is what I meant, then I misspoke. It would have been, because there is a subtle but important difference. What I intended to say, or intended to convey, is that if you omitted the word sato, it would still be a perfectly correct sentence with the same kind of meaning. And that would mean not so. In fact, we can translate it literally word by word, and I think that will quite adequately, or mostly adequately, convey the Pali meaning. So, atikochi yo sankamati, is there anyone who steps across? as opposed to atikochi sato, is there any being? So I do agree with you that kochi is just like an ordinary word of human discourse. Somebody, anybody, nobody. But atikochi sato, you are right in saying that does emphasize, is there any being? Because we know that the human body that we can all see each other in now, we know that this will die, and will perish, and this particular manifestation will be no more. So what he's asking is there a sato, is there a being? So yes, you're right to pick me up on that point.
No, sorry, not intended to pick you up on it at all, but just to make the point as well that for the Abhidhammikas, they would have to go so far as to say that there is no identifiable entity that you could call anything at all that goes from one place to another. It's momentary particles arising and passing away. Nothing steps or goes or rolls or moves from one place to the next, does it?
That's right. Here we get to this. Yes, I mean in Abhidhamma terms, it's that is right. Intuitively, is it right or is it wrong? I mean, I cannot see. I'll be right with you, Jeremy. But take Jeremy as a good example. You see, I looked at the face there on my screen and saw it was Jeremy with his hand up. And I kind of ventured to think from memory, hang on there, that looks like that excellent man, Jeremy, that I've encountered many times before. And lo and behold, he answers to the same name. So we've got this. Anyway, this is straying a little bit beyond the Pali class. So the answer is both yes and no. I mean, even this simple object like a pen. You see, either it's a pen or it is a swirling mass of electrons and other subatomic atomic particles that mostly got empty space in between. That's the difference between the conventional reality and the paramatta, the beyond reality. So, Jeremy, sorry, yes,
yes, just on the point about the Abhidharma and self and non-self and the individual. I mean, you have the five personality factors. Understanding a person in that sense, and in the Abhidharma, it's all that happens is you take it further and you analyze in terms of, well, there are 82 dhammas. One of them is nibbana. So that's different from the other 81. But one of them is chitta, is mind or consciousness. And in fact, at the point of rebirth, it's the particular consciousness that a person has at the moment of death, which then descends in the rebirth process into the womb, into the new being. So the Abhidhamma, it's actually, I think, fairly precise about what it is that what we call ourselves, a person is, and it's something that can be analyzed in terms of these dhammas. And it's also, I think, fairly precise about what happens at the point of rebirth.
Note how if that particular chitta, descends or goes from one life at the end of our life into the rebirth womb, that would pretty much count as sankamati. That's something crossing the barrier. And also the idea that patisandhati is like a paradigm scholastic term. It doesn't appear in the suttas so far as, or the earlier suttas. It's not something the Buddha ever uttered. It's something put together in order to explain how this process is somehow different from a thing moving from one place to another. So I agree. I find this incredibly fascinating. This is thought about a lot over the week.
In fact, the point that the very word the verb that Jeremy used, descends. So is that the last chitta of this identifiable lifespan? Does it descend? Even in Abhidhamma, I wouldn't say descend, it is the cause of the first chitta of the new life, but there's nothing that actually descends. It's just the last chitta is the cause of the next chitta.
Yes,
Mm.
yes. But it was interesting. By coincidence, yesterday I was talking with somebody who had been a Theravadan monk in northern
Mhm.
Thailand for 3 years.
Mhm.
So Professor Martin Seeger. So he's professor of
Mhm.
Southeast Asian studies at University of
Yes.
Leeds. And he was saying, yes, it's the importance of it's the last. As you approach death, you consider, you contemplate your acts throughout life. But the crucial thing is to make sure that you contemplate the good ones. Because
Yes.
if a bad one sort of sneaks in at the end there,
Mm.
then that's what will determine the sorry the uh,
What
sorry,
determined
I'll just put
the
myself on mute. Yeah, so
okay.
so that's why you get I think sort of Theravadan countries this idea of chanting in a person who's approaching death, chanting to
Mm.
sort of calm the mind, to allow positive recollection of good deeds done, to gather.
Let us hope it may be so, rather than being dying in a lonely hospital bed stuck full of tubes or whatever.
Without, without completely derailing this, I saw a documentary ages ago on TV where they had an abbot, an esteemed abbot of a Thai monastery, who attended to those people who were being executed for various terrible crimes. And he said that he really envied the mainly young men, like murderers and robbers. He said because they have the opportunity to reflect and they know the exact point of death.
Oh, yes.
I could be on the road and have a lustful thought before I'm hit by a bus.
Whereas
So
if you were about to be executed, that kind of thing might be far from your mind.
it might be, yeah.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
could, whereas he said, I could have a stroke or a heart attack or be injured while
Mm.
prepared. So that final moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Goodness me. Well, this is fascinating. It is a slightly stray beyond our remit here. But it's always a very good reminder. Be jolly careful of what your thoughts are, what your chitta is. Um, I hope we soon come to the word chitta again. We almost certainly will. Because I had been, it's now getting back to the linguistic side of this word, the chitta, your last chitta of life and your first chitta, the mind moment. And I had been much, much puzzled because in Abhidhamma, um, chittas are kind of mind moments, which may go by with great rapidity, chitta to chitta. And yet, um, we see that in Abhidhamma, but we see in the canonical scriptures, whereas chitta is used more in the sense of one's heart, mind, and guard your chitta. And you get Shanti Deva in the Bodhicharyavatara. Take my wealth, destroy my body, but do not destroy my chitta. Well, when chitta is being used in that sense, it is clearly not a mind moment. It is something a little bit more permanent than that. And I think it was in lesson one of Gern Karunatilaka, we talk about the suguttam chittam, the well-protected mind, and the subhavitam chittam, the well-developed mind, the well-developed chitta, and the opposites, the agutan chittang, the unguarded mind, and the abhavitan chittang, the undeveloped mind. So if you interpreted chitta here to mean a mind moment, that just wouldn't make sense. If you have a mind moment that is so brief, the ordinary mind, the ordinary intellect can't see it going by. How can you develop it or guard it, and so on? And then there's the third meaning of it, which is seems to merge into the idea of the consciousness, that which is the seeing consciousness, Chaitanya, I think they say in among the Hindus, but from the same root, which is clearly that which is stable, that which gives light, the light of consciousness. So we've got things ranging in meanings, chitta, from the a very, very brief mind moment, to this kind of that which illumines consciousness. And I actually, to my end, and how could the same root chit, come to mean such, quite obviously it's all to do with something, consciousness and mind, but how could it diverge into two entirely different, or two such different meanings? And I did find, happily, by going back into the Indo-European Pakurni, I found an answer which at least gave me a great deal of relief at the time. I'm just going to call it up here. Hope I can call it up. Yeah. And to my enormous relief, I found that actually it came from two separate roots that had became merged in Vedic and Pali. One is the Proto-Indo-European root kai or sky, meaning brightness, the illumination, and the other one was kay or kate, meaning to observe, appreciate, notice. Now, it often happens that there are homonymous roots in Vedic, roots that look exactly the same, but are in fact different words, and they're known to be different words. One example is as, just short a and s, as, which is the root meaning to be, and also unrelated, just coincidentally, a homonym meaning to throw. And you get the root bhuj, the bhuj, which means both to bend, as in fact our English word bow comes from that same, but the elbow, the arm bend, and also bhuj meaning to enjoy. Another one is vas, vas. Actually, the three meanings are vas meaning to dwell, vas meaning to shine, and vas meaning to dress. Vas, in fact, from that last vas that we get, for example, in Latin, vestire, vestments. Now, the important thing to bear in mind here is that it's well known. I mean, ancient grammarian Panini and others well knew that these were just homonyms, coincidentally identical in sound, but in fact different words, and that all of the Hindu grammarians, the Sanskrit grammarians, have said, well, these are two separate roots, as and as. However, for the root chit, no grammarian, as far as I know, no lexicographer or grammarian was aware that say, hey, these are two separate roots. But when I look back in Pakurni in his work on Indo-European roots, And when I discovered that fact, it was a great relief. That now explains it, because you've got one root meaning of chit, meaning the brightness of consciousness, and the other root chit, which is much more of a mental thing, a noticing, a state of mind. When I saw it was from those two different roots, there's a great inner relief. This goes, whether it perfectly explains that, I don't know, but for me, it went a long way towards resolving this conflict. We have the luminous consciousness of the chitta, or these kind of chittas, going thousands of seconds. I've even seen at least one writer daring to say billionths of a second, but how he calculated that, I don't know, but the idea was very, very rapid. Simon, please.
Just a question about the fact that there may be from this Pakolni two roots. Would that mean that the Sanskrit grammarians wouldn't have known about it, that they kind of joined together, and it was kind of lexicalized, or whatever the term would be, prior to them knowing about it?
I'm virtually certain that was the case. And we can't blame them for not knowing about Indo-European roots. That's the result, obviously, of later research. And the good old Panini, who was probably a contemporary of the Buddha, couldn't possibly have known. The roots like as to throw and as to be, they're so obviously different in meaning that anyone can see, okay, these are two words. Coincidentally, they're the same, even though we can see obviously that they mean two entirely different things. The same with vas and bhuj, so obviously different. But because of the kind of conceptual overlap between the two separate Proto-Indo-European words that both begin chit in Vedic, they probably were misled completely innocently, and no blame on them, into thinking it was all the same root, which in fact it's not.
And the other point, the Scandinavian head, could that have come through in like hedonic, or is that totally different? Is that a Greek root that comes from somewhere else?
So the Scandinavian head, the Scandinavian head, yes, the honorable noble is hedrande, and it becomes an idol, no, edel in German, edelweiss, the noble white. I would say that's probably entirely separate. It's not something I will check, because the hedonic, I'm virtually certain that it's separate. Though I'll check, and I'll get back. I'll get back to you on that next time. In fact, interestingly enough, in modern Russian, the verb for to read is chitat. The ach is the infinitive. So chit, meaning to read, where you're engaging your mind on a written text. Chitat.
There's also the point that people tend to see the brightness as being an objective brightness, as if things are shining, whereas most cultures tend to see consciousness as working as shining out onto something. So, the shining of the mind onto the objects, which reveals what the objects are, so to speak.
So, well, yes, and that is probably very largely accounts for the fact that the grammarians like Panini and those early linguists didn't spot that it was a different root, because this brightness and the noticing and the seeing, the engagement of the mind with something, you can see how in their minds they can merge those what were originally in Proto-Indo-European had been two separate roots into one. So, okay, so on this first sentence now, Brandinagasena atikochi satoyo imamakaya sanyangkayam sankamatiti. So any queries on this one? We can move on.
I had a question, James.
Yes, please, Anne.
If this were a statement rather than a question, would it be written differently?
The only difference is that you would see. I think essentially the answer to your question is no. The only differences you can see is because here it's a kind of a modern European edition written in Roman script, therefore a question mark is put, okay? And the other difference would have been if it was spoken, you would have heard the inflection of the voice indicating a question rather than a statement. But back to your question, if you simply recorded the original, the way it was originally said, without the inflection of the voice, just writing the words, the answer is no, you would not be able to detect from those words alone, from the way it was placed, from the way it was written, whether it was a statement or a question. So there's nothing in the way it's put that inherently makes it a question. That's why you have to rely on context to know that it is a question.
Thanks. Thank you.
So, and then the answer is nay. Again, got the na, which both means not and no, and the he is just here. It's maybe slightly emphatic. In fact, it might even appear slightly abrupt and rude if there's a monosyllabic no. So in Pali and Sanskrit as in English, which is nahi, not so, not thus, no indeed. So it doesn't really alter the fact that this is he's simply saying no. So he is just a slightly modal particle, a polite way of saying no indeed, not so, Maharaja. So Yadi Bhanti Nagasena. If Venerable Nagasena Natti, that is Natti, just joined here into Natti, there is not, there does not exist. A Sankamanto, that's the present participial form, a stepper, if there is not a stepper.
James, you've got just change the screen sharing.
Oh, sorry. You're right. Thank you. Here we are.
Thank you.
Here we are. Okay. Yadi Bhanti Nagasena Imamahakaya Anyankayam Sankamanto Natti Nanu Mutto Bhavissati Papakehi Kammehiti. So if Bhante Nagasena Natti, there is not Sankamanto, a stepper, Imamahakaya, from this body, Anyankayam, to another body, Nanu Muttu Bhavissati Papakehi Kammehi. So the Nanu is like Nispa. Is it not the case that? Wouldn't it be the case that surely it would happen? It's the Nanu. I think I've done a note here saying it's the same as the Latin, seems to be the same as the Latin nonne, which means is it not the case that, where you're inviting the answer yes. But in English, where we put it as a negative question, wouldn't one then be liberated? I say, wouldn't it be the case that just expressing the question in that way in English, it's expressed as a question, but so inviting the answer yes, if it's the questioner is expecting that it is the case, wouldn't you be pleased about that? You're saying, you're not just asking, would you be pleased? You're kind of expecting the yes answer. So, nanu, mutto bhavissate, papakehi kammehi. Mutto, so who is the subject of this sentence? it's an unexpressed subject. Would one not be released? So if there is no sankamato, no stepper over, no sato sankamanto, no being that goes over, nanu, then wouldn't it be the case that one will be released? Mutto bhavissati, that one will be released from evil deeds. This mutto it's from the root much. Munchati means to release. In fact, I'll just call up the iPad again. Where are we? Oh, yeah. So much release. And it makes its past participle root plus ta, but you can't have a ch followed by a ta in Sanskrit. The ch becomes a k before a ta. So muchta doesn't exist. So that becomes mukta. The mukta in Sanskrit is released. And by standard phonetic mutation, that Sanskrit mukta becomes mutta. And we have the verbal noun in Sanskrit mukti, and in Pali mutti, release or liberation in a spiritual sense. Very often found with the prefix vi, dynamic, away, the idea of being released, like you can see the dynamism of, for example, being a bird being released from a cage and flying out, the vimutti, being released and getting away from whatever it was that imprisoned you. And we have the well-known work, the Vimutti Magga, the path of liberation. So it's just gone 4, so we'll have a break then, and we will reconvene then and thank you on this occasion. I will try to remember to pause the recording for the break. But please remind me to switch it on again when we get back. So recording, pause recording. There we are. Jeremy, please.
Yes, I was just wondering, are there two relevant roots? And one is munch, one is much, as the one you were describing, which is the passive one, and then the other one is much, which is the active one.
Ah, okay. What happens is it's all from one root. And the root is oh, it's gone blue now. Is it because back to black. Okay.
James, do you want to shift back to your
Thank you.
iPad?
Yeah. So the root is essentially much. There are several roots which just insert a nasal when they're being conjugated. And munchati is one of them. I'm just going to call up Monia Williams on the point just to make sure that I don't accidentally mislead you.
I was looking in the Pali Text Society dictionary.
Okay. Let's look at both actually. So looking at much, Right. So let me just highlight off. Here we are. So this is the route in which now looking in Manu Williams. And the actual route properly so called is just much. It's a class 6, so it doesn't go Mochati, it goes Munchati. But some routes simply just insert a nasal. That's how we get not Muchati, but Munchati. Vindati, limpati. Some of them just do insert the nasal in the conjugation of the present stem. So in the Pali Text Society's dictionary, let me just call that up now. Okay, so remember, back to Sanskrit, root much, but it's with an inserted nasal in the present tense, munchati. I'm just now calling up the PTS dictionary. And then I'll explain the one with the double C. Is this the one that you were looking at, Jeremy?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And
Okay,
then
right.
under, but like 4 or 5 lines down, it says forms the two bases.
Okay, right. Yeah, I will explain that right now. So Vedic Munchati, two bases. We call them bases rather than roots. It doesn't specifically say the root. Okay, it says here much to release that this is the correctly so called the Vedic root, much. What happens is this. I'll call up iPad again. So let's just look at the common, very easy and common pach, meaning to cook. And it makes he, she, it cooks, pachati. Now, that's the active. Now look at the passive. No, so no, let's now look at much, root much, munchati. With that's just because that happens to have an inserted nasal. Doesn't affect the meaning, just it's there. Now let's look at the passives of these two verbs. In Sanskrit, you form the passive by infixing the ya. So ya is called the infix, and then you have the verb endings. Atmanepada. So pachyate, it is cooked. That's the passive. By standard phonetic mutation, this consonant cluster chya becomes a double C in Pali. And because Pali mostly doesn't bother with the Atmanepada endings, it's pachati. So in Sanskrit, pachati, active, cooks. Pachyate, passive, is cooked. When it comes into Pali, the Sanskrit and Pali pachati are identical. But for the passive, the chya, that consonant cluster with the ya in Sanskrit, just becomes a double C there. The very important point to remember is that we get these different classes of verbs, verses that infix the nasal. We get classes of verbs that have a class 9 verbs, for example, that insert a na, like jan, na, ti, he knows. But these classes of verbs, the regime of classes applies only to the present, imperfect, imperative, and optative. When it comes to the passive, a different regime applies. Whatever class the verb is, that doesn't apply to passives at all. So across the board, the passive, you just add ya to the root, and that's it. For example, janati, he, she, it knows. That's a class 9. That's where we get this infix inserted na, janati, kinati. Let's now come to the passive. It is known. You get back to the root nya, and it's formed completely regularly. So in the passive, the fact it's a class 9 verb, janati, is completely irregular, completely irrelevant to the form of the passive, which is just jnayate in Sanskrit, a regular formation, which would be, I'm not sure if this form of the verb is actually used in Pali, but if you used it, it would certainly be understood. Nyayati would mean it is known. So active janati, passive nyayati. So now let's look at the passive of much. And as we've just seen in the active forms, it inserts the nasal, so munchati, but in the passive, it's entirely regular. You get much, ya, te. It's the Sanskrit for much yate. It is liberated, it is freed. And by exactly the same phenomenon, we've just seen that cha of Sanskrit becomes a double cha in Pali. So muchati. So the giveaway in Pali that it's a passive is this doubling of the final consonant of the root. And just understand that the doubling comes from the fact that it's the consonant plus ya in Sanskrit, muchyate to muchati. So often in Pali, the only indication that a verb is passive rather than active is in fact this doubling. Another word for it is known as the root vid, meaning to see or to know. In Sanskrit, passive form, literally, passive form vidyate means it is seen or it is known, which actually therefore means exists. It is seen. Most commonly used in the negative, navidyate means there is no case of it. It doesn't exist. It can't happen. As I say, most frequently negative. And by, again, as you'd expect in Pali, comes navidyati. Again, it's this doubling there, vidyati, vidyati, that indicates that it's a passive in Pali. So hopefully that has clarified it, Jeremy. Okay, good.
Yes, no, thank you, James.
Right. So bhavisati, that's a regular normal plural. Mutto bhavisati, will be liberated. again, we have a silent, we have an unexpressed subject here. That very frequently happens in Pali. If you're making a general statement of fact, a universally applicable statement, meaning one will be, it's just very often expressed like a verb with no subject. Like I think it's correct to say that it'll always be obvious that's what meant a generalized statement. So we'd have to translate it as one would be, a person would be. Muttu bhavisati, he will be liberated. And papakehi kamehi. This is the ablative, you're liberated from something. So we know papa, meaning evil or wrong. The word papa is both an adjective and a noun. So this could equally correctly have been expressed as papehi kamehi, but you can you can turn papa noun, you can turn it into a derivative adjective, papaka. So papa as an adjective and papaka also as an adjective. I don't think that there is any difference of meaning. Just for you're liberated from evil deeds. So papakehi kamehi, the ehi ending of the ablative plural. So just go round with a reading of that. Anne, would you like to do us a reading of that first line? Just this first line here.
Bhante Nagasena Ati Kochi Sato Yo Imam Ha Kaya Anyam Kayam Sam Kamati Ti.
Okay, right. I detect various. I don't know whether it's just Americans generally, but there's often a tendency to lengthen vowels, whereas the English speaker wouldn't be shy about a short vowel. There's a slight American maybe I'm imagining this to lengthen vowels. If you can just
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised. American English is so different. It's regional. So Bhante Nagasena Ati Kochi Sato
Atikochi Sato
Chikochi Sato Yo Imamha Kaya Anyam Kayam Samkamati Ti.
Okay, yes, that was much better. Yeah, I remember being terribly puzzled back in the 1960s why the Americans were always talking about Vietnam and sort of the pronunciation of Vietnam. How they pronounce it over there, I do not know.
I'm still trying to learn how to say controversy, the British pronunciation, instead of controversy, like we say it here.
Actually, I think I tend to say controversy.
I hear it so many times on the shows, controversy.
Okay, yeah. I think in the older pronunciation, controversy, but I think they both become equally acceptable. I think. So Simon, was that your hand up? Okay, no, it was just my. I've seen it. It was my own cursor on the screen. It was when if it's the Zoom screen, the cursor appears as a little hand. Okay. False alarm. Okay, thank you. How about Judith? Would you like to give us a recitation of the first line?
Yes. Bhante Nagasena Ati Kochi Sato Yo Imamha Kaya Anyanyam kayam samkamati.
Right, so say sankamatiti.
Samkamatiti.
Right. Now, the actual words that Melinda would have said would have ended with just sankamati. Remember, the addition of the T here is just something that's often done in the Pali text if you're marking end of quote. Remember this, the pronunciation of Gochi, that the
Gochi.
Gochi. Remember
Gochi.
correct, exactly. Now O and A are always naturally long, and they're always pronounced long unless they are compelled to be short, which only happens if they're immediately followed by a doubled consonant or a consonant cluster. But when at the end of a word, always long, sato, yo, which you pronounce correctly, and when followed by a single consonant, again, always pronounced long, gochi. So if you just say again, atti gochi sato.
Atti gochi sato.
Exactly right, exactly right. Excellent. Thank you, Judith. And yourself, Sarah, would you like to give a recitation of this?
Sure. Bante Nagasena, Atti Kochi Sato, Yo Imamha, Kaya, Anyam, Kayam, Samkamati.
Okay, right. When you said this Gayam here, how did you pronounce the Anuswara?
Yeah, I struggle with those a bit. I kind of sometimes forget them, to be honest.
Okay, not to worry.
Kayang.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a dispute in that word on its own. If you had Gayam on its own, in ancient Pali, would the Buddha have pronounced it as Kayam with an M or Kayang with an Ng sound at the end? There's more than one school of thought here. Certainly in Sanskrit, on its own, it would be Kayam, distinctly with an M sound. But with the following S, it would tend to become a nasalized sound, of Kayang, even Kayang Sankamati in Sanskrit, but Kayang Sankamati. So in Pali, broadly speaking, you're never going to be wrong if you pronounce it as a maybe I get a bit over fussy about it.
You'd rather hear mirth than
If it was standing on its own, I mean, I maintain the view. I may stand on slightly shaky ground. I don't have a vast amount of evidence for it. That the word on its own in Sanskrit would have been pronounced with, well, we know that in Sanskrit, kayam on its own without anything following. How would it have been pronounced on its own in Pali at the time of the Buddha? The best evidence we have is how the current how people pronounce Sanskrit now and how the Brahmins chant the Vedas, where it would be with a m on it, kayam. I think that the n is an importation from the way that the Thais pronounce it. Again, it's my preferred view. I'm happy to have it displaced by further evidence. But despite the fuss I make about it, I don't invite you to fuss over it. I regret making a fuss about it.
How different would it be without the subdot?
If it were without the subdot, as here you've got to imamha, without a subdot, it's always a straight m, as in imamha. Imamha. And so here you see sankamati. We'd never say some written with a subdot, but what you've got here is just the nasal sound. merging into the next one. You say sankamati, and it's normal to say sankamati. And for example, oops, let me just call up iPad. Here we are. We do it. We do it in English without really, well, without altering the spelling. If you get the word in, okay, I'm talking about the English word, it's just in, okay. If you add a K on the end, the sound of the N becomes N automatically because of the following K. You don't see ink, but ink, which in Sanskrit and Pali would be written like that, with the dot above the N to indicate it's an L sound. Also, if it were written in that way, subdot M, it would be the sense that it would be pronounced ink. I mean, if somebody writing in Pali using Roman script just heard the English sound ink, that was how he'd write it in one of those two ways. The point is, we do it automatically in English with the following k, and the same automatic alteration of that sound, so that it's pronounced exactly where the following consonant comes out, ing, that happens across the board in Sanskrit and Pali. So the final m just takes on the tone of the following. So, for example, of the following consonant, we see that sometimes so gum, the root gum to go. This is a case where it's actually where the to go, it would be gumtum, but in fact it's actually written as well as pronounced gumtum. That's a slightly different point because the M is an integral part of the root there. It's not the anuswara. But basically, whenever you see an M at the end of end of a word, let it just merge into the following consonant. And if the following consonant is a sibilant like an S, it tends to be pronounced as an N sound.
Okay.
I'm constantly fussing about it and telling you not to fly. I'm setting a very bad example here.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So if you go on to the next one, so Simon, can you just recite those two lines for us, please?
Nahi Maharajati Yadi Bante Nagasena Imamha Kaya Anyang Kayang Sankamanto Nati Nanu Mutto Bhavisati Papakehi Kamehiti.
Very good. Yes, thank you. Thank you. And Jeremy.
Nahi Maharaja Ti Yadibante Nagasena Im Hakaya Anyam Kayam Kamanto Nati Nanumuto Pavisati Papakehi Kamehi Ti.
Okay, right. Just one thing. Remember, Bhavisati, rather lengthen that. Bhavisati, the short ati. So can you just say mutto bhavisati?
Pavisati.
Okay, right. Bhavisati. Again, there can be a temptation to lengthen that into an ati, but bhavisati, very short ati.
Sati.
Okay, what we could now do is do a bit of grammar for the last half hour. So I'm looking at page 33. This is about the interrogative pronoun. So I said it's also an interrogative adjective. You just say ko, who, interrogative pronoun. But if you say which person, ko puriso, that just changes it into the interrogative adjective. We can deal with this fairly quickly because the forms are the same as those of the relative pronoun. That's your. And the full form of the relative pronoun has been given on pages 20 and 21 in lesson 2. And they're very, very similar for go, except that the neuter is kim. You see in the locative, there are some additional forms that you don't, that in the locative masculine neuter for you is yamhi or yasamin, whereas for the ko you get the equivalent forms kamhi, kasiming, but also kimhi, kismim. So you get both vowels there. And for the feminine, again, it's got various different forms for the locative kasam, kayam, kasa, kaya. You won't very often find them. Those of you who want to learn it all by heart, wonderful, but otherwise the most important thing is to recognize them when you see them and know where to find them. And the plural form is it's the same. It's virtually, is it exactly identical? If you look at the plural form, ke, kani, and ka, and kayo, if you look back to page 20, the top of page 20, you see the forms te, tani, ta, tayo, meaning they. You'll see that the plural of ke exactly follows the plural te, just substituting so there's no extra effort of learning there for the plural. Ke, who, plural, te, they, masculine, well, plural. Now the verb as, or the root as, meaning to be, at the bottom of page 33. It's this, we were discussing this root earlier. It's the as. There are two separate roots, both as meaning to throw and as meaning to be coincidentally the same, but in fact entirely different meanings and recognized as such in Sanskrit grammar. As is a class 2 verb. That means that if it were a class 1 verb, which as to throw is, it would be asati. But in fact, it's a class 2 verb, so the T ending is added directly to the root. This is in Sanskrit. That's where we get asti. And the asti, by regular phonetic mutation, becomes ati in Pali. But for the The classicists, the Latinists among you, you'll recognize that the Latin verb esse, to be, and est, meaning is, which we discussed in the first part of this class. For the second person singular, assi, normally what would have happened, just as in a class 2 verb the ending ti is joined directly to the root asti, which is regular, you would have expected to see as plus si, assi with a double s. Irregularly, same in Sanskrit and Pali, one of the s's is dropped. That is why you get assi, second singular, thou art. And there's the well-known Vedic phrase, tat tvam asi, literally, that thou art that. I mean, this is in Hinduism, especially in Vedanta, it's saying that what you perceive as your separate self is the same as the Paramatma, the same as Brahman. That's the meaning of there is Tattvamasi, that thou art. You are the same as that. You are that. For the first person, I am, it's asmi. In Sanskrit, it is asmi, and that's regular. In Pali, it has the form asmi, but also the Pali variant form with the S is dropped and replaced by the so you will find both forms in Pali, asmi and ami. And just look at the plural, asma, alternatively, amha. Second plural, atta, with a characteristic tha ending for the second person plural, you plural. And for the third person, santi. Now, you would have expected to see asanti, they are. But irregularly, the of the root just drops. That's why it gets to santi. By a curious phenomenon of linguistic history, Latin does exactly the same. Because esse, sum, is est, but the plural is sunt. So the first vowel of the root, the infinitive, drops off. So Latin sunt, which in French where we have sont, S-O-N-T, same phenomenon. So just by a strange quirk of linguistic history, we get the same phenomenon occurring in Latin, in Sanskrit as in Latin. And santi, by the way, I mean they are, is identical for Sanskrit and Pali. Jeremy, did you have a?
No, it was just the points you made about what it is in Latin and what it is in French.
Yeah. Sometimes I just drop in, if I happen to be talking to a young lawyer, I drop in a little bit of the Latin about it, and they always sadly, we're discouraged from using Latin nowadays. Such a loss to the law, Hennington, isn't it? Going over the page, but I should mention at the very top of page 34, the observation ati asserts the existence of something. So although bhavati, hoti, ati in theory mean the same thing, just is, the verb as tends to have more to have the meaning to saying that something exists or doesn't exist, rather than A is B, tends to mean A exists. In an earlier lesson, we studied the regular verb bhavami, bhavasi, bhavati. If you look at this table a little way down, page 34, homi, hosi, hoti, that in fact is just a softened form, an abbreviated form of the fuller form bhavami. So let's take the third person bhavati, he, she, it is. That's the same in Sanskrit and Pali, bhavati. The alternative form, hoti, does not exist in Sanskrit. It's just a colloquialized, shortened form of bhavati, which is found in Pali only. And the same applies for the other forms, homi, hosi, hoti. So the regular verb bhavati, bhavasi, and I am bhavami, hoti, hosi, homi. There is no distinction of meaning between those two forms. I say the shortened forms, hoti, husi, humi, do not exist in Sanskrit. They're just like colloquial shortenings. And then plural, homa, hota, honti. The example given here is the difference. So hoti is it may assert existence in the same way that atti does. But if you want to say, here a monk is virtuous, is a bhikkhu silava hoti, it would be much more common to see the verb bhavati or hoti there rather than atti. So the atti tends to assert the fact of that something exists. It is there. Hoti is much more used in the equational things. A is B, the monk is virtuous. Bhikkhu silava hoti. There's a note in 2.3, bhavati. Notice by the bhavati, I said there was no distinction of meaning. In theory, that's right. But in the sense of to become, I think you would tend to see bhavati rather than hoti. So bhavati is to be and to become. It means both. And you find interesting distinction from a verbal noun from the root bhu. You have both bhava and bhava. Both of those are verbal nouns from the root bhu, meaning to be. In usage, they tend to be differentiated in their meanings. So this is it's not a strict hard and fast rule, but I think that more often than not you will see that bhava tends to mean becoming, whereas bhava is a more static being, your state of being. So, for example, in the bhavatanha, the tanha, Sanskrit trishna, meaning thirst, or often translated as craving. So bhavatanha, sometimes translated as craving for being. I interpret it as meaning the craving to either the continuing being or to become something else, or if you're in a situation well, if there's a situation you want to arise, the bhavatanha, you want something to come into being. But so it could mean either the craving for being or the craving for becoming, further becoming what you aren't. As I said, bhava tends to be more static. For example, the word tunhi, meaning silent. So the state of being silent, or just being in a state of silence, you tend to say tunhi bhava, not tunhi bhava. So tunhi bhava might mean becoming silent, falling silent, whereas tunhi bhava means more statically just being silent, being in the state of silence. So that will broadly account for these two forms that you will see, bhava and bhava. So I say not strictly delimited, but they tend to have those differentiated meanings. Looking now at point 3, just under halfway down page 34, of the napti form does not exist, is not. In Sanskrit, asti, and if you have na asti, is not, by regular sandhi that just becomes nasti, na asti, nasti. And in Pali, na ati, you can see how this first a wants to drop out, whereas in Sanskrit, the lengthening of that a, the lengthening of the a is compulsory. Na asti has to become nasti by the coalescing of the final short a followed by a short a, nasti. In Pali, Pali doesn't like to have a long vowel before a double consonant, which is why it's not nati, but just nati. Myself, I would prefer to write it like that, with the apostrophe to indicate the dropped vowel, but that's just a matter of style. When you're seeing Pali written in the the original scripts, or some of the original the current scripts, the Devanagari, Thai, Burmese, Sinhala, and others like Khmer, they don't use the apostrophe. The apostrophe is just a convenience that we can allow ourselves with the Latin script. So the example given, nati sattoyo evam sankamati, that's an example that we've just been looking at. There is no being who thus steps over. We now look at the optative. Where you see a verb, if you look at the tables, and the one at the bottom of page 34 and the two at the top of page 35, they're characterized by this aya, the e double y, and that is one of the marks of the optative form. There is another version of the optative which we get to quite soon, but we needn't bother to look at it now. This is the most common form, the ayami or ayam, ayasi or ayati. No distinction of meaning. If you look through these forms given here, you'll see that the ami, the ama, ata, the instead of anti, you'll see that they broadly reflect the ordinary indicative endings. But as I say, if you see the A-E-double-Y at the end of a verb, that immediately alerts you to the fact that this is going to be an optative form. And the optative, it very often has the meaning of like a conditional sentence, a conditional meaning, or frequently used in a generalized statement. We were making a broad and general statement about morality or life or whatever. If you use the indicative, that tends more to mean you're making a particular statement about a particular person or thing, whereas the use of the optative tends to be a more broad and generalized statement. It's also used where there's some doubt or conditionality about the about the meaning. I'm just seeing, have we had an example? No, we did. Okay, no, we didn't have an example of it, but there will be several in this lesson. We'll come to it. So if one were to obtain, if I were to obtain yadi labhami, but labhi yadi labhayam, if I were to obtain. So it's something to express in European languages, a verb that might be expressed in the subjunctive form. We often find the optative form in Pali. Incidentally, Old Vedic did have a separate subjunctive form, but that has died out. So even by the time of classical Sanskrit, the Vedic subjunctive had dropped out of use and had become replaced by the optative form. So you can regard the optative, those of you who know any modern European languages, is covering broadly the subjunctive and the conditional forms. And it says the optative of ati is also irregular. The optative of ati is siya, Sanskrit syat. Again, kind of reflected in the Latin sit, let it be. But we'll come to that. Now, looking at the uses of the optative, that's halfway down page 35, paragraph 4.2. It generally indicates that the situation described is hypothetical, might be true or might come about, often future, often implication that it would be good if such and such were the case. So here we see is the difference in making a positive statement about something and a statement which indicates hope or doubt, likelihood, a generalized statement. So there's the optative is fairly wide use. So the example given, yada tumhe attanava janayata, the janayata, that's the second person plural. When you know this really by yourself. So the janayata is put in the optative or conditional form here because it's he's making a statement about the future in the hope that it will happen. When it does finally happen, if and when it comes to pass that it's the case. So you would expect to see the optative here. Something that hasn't yet happened, but it is hoped will happen and may or may not happen. That's a normal use of the optative. And the next example, kusalam dukkaya samvattaya nahamevam vadayam. Again, that's a pure conditional. If merit led to sorrow, I would not speak thus. So if we just want to say punya, merit, leads to sorrow, and I do not speak thus, we just say kusalam dukkaya samvattati naham evam vadami. Merit does not speak to sorrow, that is not what I say. But here, it's explicitly in a conditional form. If merit led to sorrow, I would not speak thus. So kusalam dukkaya samvattaya. You don't even have to put the it in, because the optative here imports the conditionality and imports the notion of if. Nahamevam vadayam. I would not say thus. And also, says the optative can also be used as a polite imperative. Might you please? It would be good if you could. In French, rather than just asseyez-vous, you could say veuillez vous asseoir. Please be willing to seat yourself. So you should abide, viharayata. Just the imperative, viharata, abide, do that. Viharayata, may you abide. So you see these, the polite imperative use here. So going now to the imperative form at the top of page 36. So it tells you here that the singular is he, and the plural is pa. Okay, as far as it goes, that is correct. However, bear in mind that in verbs with an a stem, which is the majority of verbs, for example, just be, imperative be, bhava, you can say bhava, say, vada. These forms are Sanskrit and also in Pali. So wherever you have the in Sanskrit an imperative just ending in a, bhava, vada, vihara, abide, gacha, go. So where you have the Sanskrit form just ending in an ati, or even in Pali form ending in an ati, mostly you can just drop off the t and make the imperative with the final a. Pali also allows adding a he to the end, and you lengthen the a. Bhavahi, be, vadahi, say, gachahi, go. So Pali actually allows both forms. And there's okay, so it does actually give a note at the bottom here. So it gives the examples. So present tense stem labha, imperative singular labhahi, and the plural labhata. Okay. Simon, please.
Is the he suffix, is that related to the he that's an intensifier? So you'd be saying like, do it, get you gone, speak it. Is it to do with that, or is it just
nice one, but no. What happens actually is, I can see where you thought that it might sound logical. In Sanskrit, you've got the great majority of verbs, as we know, end in an a stem, bhavati, and so on. It's classes 1, 4, 6, and 10 are the a stem, which in Sanskrit, just the imperative ends in an a, as in bhava, labha. Muncha, liberate. Gameya, make go, cause go. Bhavaya, develop, meditate. Bhavaya. So bhavaya. Bhavaya. For all of the other classes of verb in Sanskrit, the second person singular imperative ends in a he, but only in the other classes apart from 1, 4, 6, and 10. What Pali has done is to take the he, which in Sanskrit is restricted to certain classes of verb, and has generalized it for all verbs. But it's an integral part of the verb itself. It's not this emphatic particle he. For the Sanskritists among you, look at this second person plural ending. Ta is the same as the indicative. Note that in Sanskrit it is not so. We're looking at the second person plural now, you in the plural. You are, Sanskrit and Pali, identical, bhavata, bhavata. What has happened in Sanskrit, the second person plural is the unaspirated. So bhavata, be, ordering somebody to be. But what has happened in Pali, the imperative is the same as the indicative. Indicative imperative. So that Sanskrit differentiates bhavata, aspirated T, you are, bhavata, imperative, be, plural. In Pali, they are identical forms. So, oops, where's my pen gone again? Oh, it's back. Very good. So, in the Pali greeting, let's use it in the greeting. May you be happy. But Sukhita Bhavata, in Pali, that is potentially ambiguous. It can mean either you are happy or may you be happy. Be happy. In Sanskrit, if you wrote Sukhita Bhavata with a th, that would be exclusively the indicative form, making a statement of fact, you are happy. But if you want to give that greeting in Sanskrit, remember, don't put in the H, be Sukhita Bhavata. That would make it unambiguously imperative in Sanskrit. So here's the difference here. Simon.
The first person, it's the same as the present indicative. So that there's these phrases like, there's no need for one who is virtuous to say, may I know this, like Vediyami. Is that simply because if it's the first person, you're going to do it anyway? So it's like, I'm doing it.
Brilliant. No, I don't think so. I think it's because Pali has lost something that is there in Sanskrit. So in Sanskrit, the first person imperative, may I be, is bhavani with an N. Bhavani. So bhavani, which is identical with Pali, I am, is making a statement of fact. This bhavani is in fact a survival, it's the only survival that I know of from the Vedic subjunctive, may I be, so ani instead of ami. But it is used in classical Sanskrit as the imperative. It was telling yourself to be. So I know in Sanskrit is janami. May I know? I want to know. You're telling yourself that you ought to know. It would be janani with an N. this distinction has been lost in Pali. So you don't have a Bhavani. So, for example, in the chant that we have, Avero Homi, Abhyapajo Homi. If you were translating that into Sanskrit, you would say Bhavani with an N, meaning may I be. Otherwise, in Sanskrit, it would be unambiguously a statement of fact. In Pali, that distinction between the imperative and or first person imperative and first person indicative is lost. So we've come to 520. I'll make a note of where we got to, and we'll resume at those points next time round. So we can chant the blessing and bid our farewells. Okay. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba buddhanubhavena sada suddhi bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada suddhi bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakhantu sabba devata sabba sanghanu bhavena sada suddhi bhavantu te. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thank you all very much, and hopefully see you again well, some of you are on Saturday now when our next class is, otherwise today fortnight. Okay, thank you all. Goodbye then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
James.
Bye. Goodbye.